Okay, and so just where did you go? There you are. Okay, good deal. Hi, everybody. Welcome to the book club for the book In Sheep's Clothing by George Simon. And I have with me tonight Lucy, and we're going to discuss the question. Lucy has some fantastic questions and notes that she came up with, and then I have a few, well, that's an understatement. I have quite a few notes of my own on this book, and we're just going to discuss it. So let's see, Lucy, you want to just jump right into it?
Yeah, hi everybody. This is one of my favorite books for kind of cutting through the fog and figuring out what was going on. He really does a good job of going in depth on some of the tactics that are used, and I just can't say enough about Dr. George Simon. So I hope everybody who read it enjoyed it as much as I did.
Yeah, I agree. You actually were the one that suggested this book, and I hadn't read it before. I'm not even sure if I'd heard of it before you suggested it, and I really enjoyed it as well. And we'll get more in depth here, but I think one of the things that I enjoyed the most about this book is that he takes a very hard line with understanding these kinds of manipulative and like aggressive personalities. And it's a very, I would say, like unconventional approach, but I think he's just absolutely right on with what he has to say and how he says it. It was actually very refreshing to read. He's very no nonsense. So let's see. Lucy, your first question, you had said, what is this book about? And you went on to say that Dr. Simon makes the point that traditional psychology and traditional models of analyzing the whys of disturbed character behavior simply don't work. He says they need limits, boundaries, and they need the brakes put on the behavior at the first sign of anything that smacks of coloring outside the lines. So I liked that. It sounds like we kind of had the same take on the book. And let's see, the next question. Lucy, are you there?
Yeah, I was having trouble with YouTube. I was trying to mute it, and I just finally had to turn it off because I was hearing both at the same time.
Oh, gotcha.
So I turned it off.
Gotcha.
I'm back. I'm with you. Yeah. So what I thought was really important about what it's about is that they're not depressed, they're not insecure. You know, when most people of our ilk go to see a doctor or a psychologist, we're usually what he calls neurotic, more on that spectrum rather than disordered. And we have things like depression, insecurities, and things that are the driving factors, the underlying factors. But that's not the case with these people. He doesn't talk a lot about wiring, but I think that's what he means when he says that the traditional models of treating for depression or insecurities and what have you just don't work. That you really have to take a stand and say no to the behavior. So I thought that was really great that he brought that up early in the book.
Yes, I agree completely. He had mentioned something that I'm getting a lot of feedback on your end.
Yeah, you're probably hearing when I had both the YouTube and the other on. Hopefully that will clear up in about 30 seconds.
Okay. No, I'm still hearing it. Oh, wait. Nope, it's still there. Nope, no, it's not. Okay.
Yeah, I just had to turn it off.
Gotcha. Okay. Uh, yes. And so he talks about that's one of the hardest things, I think, for people, I would say, including therapists and people in the mental health field, to truly understand that it's, communication isn't the problem. It's the personality that's the problem. And, you can communicate until you're blue in the face, and the problem is because it's their personality, and because they lack a solid moral compass, they have no conscience. Everything that comes out of their mouth is a manipulation. And whereas normal people have defense mechanisms, they might lie, they might do these behaviors, it generally serves a purpose. But for a person that has no moral compass, or who completely lacks a conscience, they always have their own agenda. And, they're not lying to get out of trouble. They're not minimizing or denying things because they can't handle the truth. They're doing these things because they're manipulative and they're seeking to win. And anytime, if we're not confronting the behavior head on, if we're having kind of sympathy for the devil, so to speak, if we're continuing to be like, oh my goodness, you must be this way because you were abused as a child, or oh my goodness, you must be this way, and here's all these other excuses that must be the reason as to why you use, abuse, and exploit other people, then it sets us up to be re-victimized, because then they can further exploit that and turn this into a whole pity ploy of, well, I just can't help the way that I am, and continue to drag a person through hell, basically.
Right. I agree. And then that you touched on, that the moral compass. I mean, again, people like us, and I believe we are a separate and different group. We have a moral compass, and it's second nature to just count on ourselves to be fair and respectful and trustworthy, and strive to be those things. And we don't know what to do with somebody who seems to be constantly pushing up against that boundary. It just doesn't make sense. And again, if you grow up, I'm quite a bit older than you, 20 years, and you grow up thinking, well, everybody's the same. They're just different places on this one single spectrum, but they're not. They're somewhere else. That my brain just simply does not go there. It's really hard for me to fathom thinking that way. So I think that's why we fall for it, because we just don't realize there's something fundamentally different.
I agree. I think that's one of the biggest things that people tend to struggle with, is thinking, I think we're all kind of raised to think if you do good, people will treat you how you treat them. And, but when you're dealing with such a manipulative person, to continue trying to be cooperative and to be solutions oriented and to be pleasant and polite and seeking a solution, they're going to further use that to manipulate. And because we're not wired that way, it's just not even on our radar of possibility that other people could be like this. It's so incredibly foreign to how we have been processing the world. And yeah, that's a big thing. I think too, it's one of the reasons when people come across the term narcissist or sociopath or psychopath, that it's so eye-opening. And it's that realization of, oh, wow, okay, this is in fact outside of the realm of normal behavior. That as such a thing as like a personality disorder, or he calls them character disorders, exist. And and I've talked about this before, I see a lot of myself included, I see a lot of people that get stuck on, well, how can I really tell if they're a narcissist or a sociopath or a psychopath and not just a person with bad behavior? But then the reality is normal people don't act like narcissists, sociopaths, or psychopaths. Like none of that's in the realm of normal behavior. And it's the difference between like an event and a pattern. Like if a person has a consistent, like a pervasive, persistent pattern of problematic behavior, that's their personality. And I think it's important that we see that this is the person's personality and that they're not going to change it. If a person's so far, their behavior is so outrageously outside of the lines that they use, abuse, and exploit other people on a consistent basis, like, that's not workable. And for us to stay in that dynamic, continuing to try to make it work, it's exhausting. And really, I think that's why these kinds of characters are called energy or emotional vampires, because it just drains the life force out of you because you're having to continually be on guard, continually correcting them, continually bringing things up, continually, wondering. And not to mention, you're continually confused because you're being continually manipulated. It's just a very, very difficult way to live. And it's important that we see it for what it is and to truly just give up hope of trying to fix or change other people and just realize that this is just, in many ways, it's almost like a different breed of person, that their personality is so far outside the realm of workable that, to try to make it work or to try to get them to get to the place where they can function in a healthy way within society is it's an exercise in frustration and crazy making. Let's see. The next point that you brought up here was, well, what makes us different from them and why are they this way?
Well, he makes a point that he says they have not made the internal commitment to be good. And I believe he capitalized that in the book. And that's his take. It's hard for me to accept that. I remember making that commitment myself at about 8. I do. I really remember saying, okay, I've observed this, I've observed that. I'm going to choose to be like myself. And when I say this and that, I meant my family. And I had some kind of moral code inside of me that was driving me. And that's why I just wonder if it's not somewhat genetic. I know that nobody's proved that yet. But then again, they say you can do a brain scan and see different function or lack of function in some of these folks. So I just have to wonder, that nature, nurture, eternal argument that goes on. Being that I'm the oddball, apparently in my own family, of course, I lean way towards genetics. I didn't see it in my grandparents, but I did see it in my family of origin quite a bit. Once I woke up and with Dr. Simon's help, was able to identify some of the behaviors and go, wow, that fits. That's so true. That's what's been going on. So,
Yeah, I agree. I think that there is like he says, that internal commitment to be good, for them, because they lack that moral compass, there is no good or bad. It's their moral compass is based around what they want. And
whatever's best for me.
Whatever's best for them. Yep. And it's very much like the emotional maturity of like a 2-year-old. And it's there's just nothing there's no remorse. It's just pure selfishness. And yeah, and I don't know, nature versus nurture, it's so hard to say. The problematic people in my life, the vast majority of them that I have known, like friends and family, have all come from fairly normal, I would say even bordering healthy families. A lot of my patients were born in incredibly toxic and abusive situations, but it really does kind of make me think we just don't know, because I've worked with lots of other patients that came from horrific abuse and went on to become perfect, nice, normal, law abiding, helpful, considerate members of society. So that are married with children and, so I don't know. It's interesting though, kind of what makes a person this way. I liked your point. Okay, so you mentioned here, why do we find it difficult to stand up to these characters?
Right. Well, I think we don't want to be judge, jury, and executioner for another person. I mean, it's out of the norm for us. I mean, that seems to be a theme that I've had probably some of the greatest difficulty with the ones that I was surrounded with, is that just a lack of self-control. I mean, I expect you as an adult to be in control of yourself and control your tongue and your behavior. And I don't want to be constantly reminding you, how to talk to me, it's not okay to do this. It's not okay to do that. It's not okay. I don't want to do that. That's not a free and easy exchange. So, but like we've touched on already, it's just being on that watch and on guard and having to constantly observe what's going on. It will wear you out, because it's nonstop. You really have to watch it all the time, and it can really be exhausting to have to keep a watch on somebody like that.
Right. And then not to mention too, a lot of times they're doing so much behind the scenes. So even if we are on a high alert of trying to pay attention to what are they up to now and how are they acting now, what we see tends to be just the tip of the iceberg. So much goes on behind the scenes, like stolen social security numbers, stolen identity, cheating, double lives, ads on dating sites when they're married, molesting children, like it just the stealing, embezzling, fake names. It just doesn't end. Like the level of, Richard Grannon said this once. He said, with these kinds of people, it's just different levels of the game. And you think that you're peeling back a layer and that you're finally starting to get somewhere. Like, oh, I'm seeing them for who they are, or you're getting some sort of crumb of truth from them, or, because they might come clean, with some behavior, but what they come clean with is just because they realize that this is their way of doing damage control and that they need to now manipulate you further so you don't leave, so they can continue to use you. It just all manipulation.
Right. And it may not even be so much. I mean, yes, I have had experience with the double lives and the stealing and all of that with some of them. But some of them, it's just even the thought process, just living with their way of dealing with things. It still wears me out. To constantly have to be on guard for verbal attacks and sneaky, snarky comments. And I mean, even that, just living with that is going to wear you out. I mean,
yeah.
If you hear what I'm saying, just the thinking process of what is the right way to behave and how is the right way to respond. And you're constantly being like this barrage of odd behavior. And again, I come back to the thing that saved my life is starting to say, would I do that? If I was in their position, would I do what they're doing? Would I act like that? Would I say that? Would I behave that way? And if the answer is no, then we got a problem, because there's just something wrong with the way that the brain works. And I can't put it any clearer than that.
Mm-hmm.
There might not be embezzling and all of that, but it still doesn't mean that you have a happy life.
Yeah. Even just being with a person that has no sincere accountability for their behavior, like that piece alone, and they don't understand how their behavior is hurtful. It's not, that alone is not workable, even if there's no verbal abuse, even or physical or emotional or psychological. If they just lack that emotional awareness that they don't have, or that they have impaired empathy and remorse, where you're kind of wondering, why does this person not, like, they just don't seem to care. I dated this guy once, and this was a relationship I had between Jack and Steve. And I didn't realize for the longest time that it was problematic, but because it wasn't extreme, it wasn't like a Lifetime TV movie like my relationships with Jack and Steve were. And we used to go off-road, like in the sand dunes and stuff. And he had a truck that had the race seatbelts. And for whatever reason, we went maybe a dozen or so times. And every time we would go, I like couldn't breathe. And I don't know if it was, I just, like the seatbelts were too tight or what have you, but it was a major problem. And the last time I went with them, it was so bad that my hands had locked up and my mouth was like numb. And he still had, there was like no empathy. There was no acknowledge. And I kept saying like, there's something really wrong. I don't know what my problem is. I don't know if my seatbelt's like compressing my chest too much or what's going on, but can you like slow down, or can you do something different so I can try to figure this out? And he just didn't care. And that was the strangest thing for me, because I'm like, how can you not care? Like, obviously I'm not faking it. Like, my hands have totally locked up. There's something going on here physically with me. And he was annoyed annoyed by that. And so even to like, if a person doesn't understand your pain, whether it's physical pain or emotional pain, it's a problem. And it's, how can you have a relationship with somebody who lacks that, you know?
Yeah, that's tough. And I love that the characters that he used in his book were just normal, quote unquote, people, a minister and his wife, and then a guy and his boss. I mean, it wasn't, he didn't go to the prison to do these interviews. It was just regular everyday clients that he was seeing in his practice that still had disorders that were disruptive and destructive to their families. And I love that it's just normal everyday characters in his book.
I agree. That was one thing I noticed in this book and in the book, The Verbally Abusive Relationship. And in both books, I remember thinking, boy, these examples they're giving are really mild compared to the stuff that we see every single day in the support group and that we deal with on this channel. And I think in many ways, it's good to show that it doesn't have to be extreme. Like a person doesn't have to be getting, yelled at or hit or, belittled or berated or, threatened and to really realize that this kind of stuff that we talk about oftentimes on my live stream and in the support group, this is on the extreme side of the spectrum. And this is like way problematic. And so I think that that's important for us to realize that there is a whole spectrum of problematic behavior, but anywhere along that spectrum, it's still a problem. And that not all of these people are absolute monsters. Their behavior is still incredibly damaging, and it's still worthy of being a deal breaker. But I think it's important too for us to realize, because I see this a lot too, where people are like, well, their baseline for what's a problem is their most problematic relationship. But when you're using that as your baseline, then that can be a terrible gauge, because if the most problematic relationship was this person was threatening to kill you or was leading a double life or was verbally abusive, to realize that's way, way extreme, and to not have that be your gauge for what's acceptable in your life, and instead have that line be like, hey, I need to aim for what's healthy. Instead, have that be your line for what you want in your life, instead of, well, is this, how dangerous and destructive is this person really? Because that's a slippery slope that's not going to end well.
Yeah, I agree.
Let's see. Okay, so you kind of touched on this a little bit. You said, what is going on in these interactions and what can we do and when should we use techniques to deal with them?
Well, I think that when you're trying to deal with somebody like this, the biggest thing that that caused me to understand that I had to end the relationships is it just really wasn't one of mutual caring. It really had been one-sided all these years. And I accept it now. I truly do. It's a matter of capability. The capability simply is not there. I think if they could, they would have a long time ago. But it was so, at the same time, it was so normal to me that I didn't understand that that they lacked a capability. I don't know how to put that any better. I'd never heard of a narcissist until 3.5 years ago. So I didn't even know what it was, or a psychopath, sociopath, any of those. I'd never heard of them. But I think that what Dr. Simon is suggesting and ways of dealing with this, if a person at all has the capability or capacity to change, then yeah, these ways can help. But the most important thing that I got out of this book is being able to identify the behavior, which also helps with acceptance. I don't think that when they got in line to be born, they said, gee, I want to be a psychopath. That's my goal, So I think that the ways that he teaches people to deal with this stuff is valuable, because there's times where you have to deal with these people. You've gotten involved with them. You have a job you can't transfer out of, or you can't quit for financial reasons, whatever, or you're perhaps divorced and still have to deal with your partner to raise the children. or there's just social situations that you're going to run into. So I think it's really good that he talks so openly about this. There's a chance for an education and learning. But at the same time, it kind of frees me up to go, yeah, gosh, it's not me. It really wasn't me all this time. And I can let go and I can totally accept it's just not possible. And the type of relationship that I want, which always will involve mutual respect, honesty, and caring, isn't possible with a person like this. So I don't know. I just really love it. His book. It just really helped me.
Yeah, I agree. When I was reading the part where he was talking about, kind of different ways to continually call them on their behavior and to not let them slide out of it. And it's funny, we both wrote down all of the different ways that they go about manipulating. And so he brings up, I don't know, there's maybe 16 or so different ways that he talks about how they go about manipulating. And once you are aware of these are manipulations, to basically stop everything and then address it. And the whole goal is to stay on topic and to not let them derail the conversation or slide out of it, or like knock us off balance emotionally, or knock the conversation off balance by crying or yelling or blaming or minimizing or denying or any of the other things that they tend to do. But when I remember when I was reading that part in the book, I was exhausted just reading it, because I'm like, man, it's an uphill battle every single day, every moment of every single day. And, and yeah, there's many people out there that are here tonight and then in the support group in general where, they're having to parent with these people, or they might be family that they can't get away from, or like you were saying, it's a boss, or there's some situation that they can't effectively go no contact from them. And so some of these strategies can work. I think what also can be helpful is to try to stay cool, calm, and collected as much as possible. And there was a video. There's a YouTuber by the name of Be Good 4000, and he did and I've mentioned this before, but I love it. He did a video on kind of seeing the manipulations for what they are, and he used the example of like the scene in The Matrix, how Keanu Reeves is in there, and the bad guys the agents, right, are firing a gun at him, and the bullets moving in slow motion, and he's able to dodge out of the way. I thought that was the perfect example, because once you can see the manipulations for what they are, you can see them coming, and then you can start to dodge out of the way. It takes practice. But you can get to the place where you're no longer knocked off balance by all of the anger, the rage, the silent treatment, the trying to make you jealous or insecure, the threatening to leave, the verbal abuse, any of that. Like you see it for what it is, and then you can respond accordingly. I think something else that can happen, or something else that can be beneficial, especially in a work situation, is to try to get some sort of witness to your reality. So if you're realizing this person is just on the attack and they're trying to make your life miserable, to get ideally like another boss or human resources or some other person to where they can't come to you directly, that they have to get this other third person involved so somebody else can see every single thing that they're doing, and to write it all down. And a lot of it, if we're not aware of what exactly, like how they're manipulating, it can feel kind of nebulous. Like I can't quite pinpoint what they're doing. They're just making my life a living hell. but trying to write it down as much as you possibly can. And then I think, and we're going to go through these different common techniques used by manipulators. Once you're more familiar with them, then you'll be able to spot them in your everyday life, and it's helpful. And actually, and real quick, another strategy that Patricia Evans gives in her book, The Verbally Abusive Relationship. And of course, this totally depends on how dangerous the person is, because if a person's in a really abusive relationship, some of these strategies could backfire big time and get a person really hurt. But she had recommended, videotaping them or recording them and saying, so when they start acting ridiculous and manipulative, to just say, oh, okay, hold on just a second. Here's where things go off trail. I'm going to start recording this conversation. And generally, if they're on the more mild end, they'll become more aware of their behavior once they know that it's actually being recorded. But again, like if you're dealing with somebody that's on the extreme end, especially if they've ever threatened violence or if they've ever been violent, doing something like that could really, land a person in the hospital. I would not recommend it. Okay. Let's see. Okay, so your next point was, what chance do we have of being successful in relationships with disturbed characters?
And my response to that is I just would not ever deliberately and intentionally and willfully put myself into a situation where I was trying to have an intimate relationship with somebody who's disturbed. I mean, the degree of effort for me personally is very challenging. And having PTSD makes it worse. I get very triggered by the display of the behaviors. And the one that'll get me the easiest is to start screaming at me out of the blue. And I'll get to that later. But I would not have the presence of mind to pick up a video camera if somebody started just screaming at me or attacking me or ambushing me. Plus, to get to that level of emotional disconnection, wait a second, let me get my video camera. Let me tape this. The relationship's over as far. I'm not getting what I want out of this. This is not a safe place. This is not a place where there's trust and mutual respect. There's nothing for me here. I don't know how to explain that, but whenever the lights went on and I figured out what was going on, I just had absolutely no interest in going any further. So no, it was, for me personally, I can't be successful because I either freeze up in terror and can't respond even appropriately. I can't disengage because my amygdala gets involved. And but my recommendation that I give in my summary is suspect the worst and hope for the best. Is about the best you can ever hope to do if you're going to stay long-term involved and try to be intimate with somebody that's disturbed. Is you're always going to have to go around being suspicious and yet trying to paint and look for that silver lining, paint a happy picture and hope for the best. So I just knew that living that way wasn't a way I could live. So that's why I had to choose no contact. It was the only thing that was going to give me some peace, really.
Yeah. And I agree completely with what you were saying as far as, if you're to the point where you're having to, Google somebody else's behavior, try to record them, you're you're always on guard, you're suspicious, like there is no relationship. If there's no trust, if there's no open, honest, sincere, solutions-oriented communication, then there is no relationship. It's a very one-sided dynamic where they're just doing whatever they want, and then we're being dragged through hell. And just to clarify too, I don't think I would have the presence of mind if somebody was yelling at me to grab, a phone and start recording. However, I went on a few dates with this guy. Well, actually, it was more just us chatting online, but we had these conversations that would just go off the rails. And it took me a while to realize that it was intentional and that it was manipulative, and that he kept blaming me for being too emotional and basically not using the right words, that I was being confusing and manipulative. And in many ways, I wished I had kept all of those texts, and I wish I had recorded some of our Skype conversations, because I always left those conversations so confused, wondering, is it me or is it him? And, that's another big sign. If you're finding yourself introspective and you're like, is it me or is it them? Odds are it's them. And to think about, how do you feel around people that you feel safe with in your life? Odds are you're not continually wondering, like, what just happened there? And you're not kind of having to analyze or rehash conversations and figure out, how did things get so far off track? And you're not leaving conversations feeling frustrated and angry and like you want to call them back right away and make your point. And you're not feeling knocked off balance, is really what it boils down to. So yeah, no contact is, if it's at all possible, really truly is the best way. It's sort of like the movie War Games, that movie from the 80s with Matthew Broderick. And in it, he realizes the only winning move, or actually, no, I think it was the computer, that the only winning move was to not play. And that's really what it is when you're dealing with an emotional manipulator. Is we can't even begin to think of all of the different ways that they could potentially harm us, emotionally, financially, physically, you name it. And you talked about this a little bit in this next point here. You said, why is it so hard for us to deal with people like this? And you had said, you're like, I don't want to have to watch over someone else night and day. And you don't want to have to be on guard for their next unprovoked attack. That's a really hard way to live. And it's each individual's responsibility to monitor and control their behavior, that you're not going to volunteer to do it for them unless you have to, unless they're like a boss or a child. It's wearing, it's exhausting, and it's draining. And I loved how you said that, because that truly just sums it up. If a person doesn't have the understanding of adult behavior, like appropriate adult behavior and self-regulation, by the time that they're 18, we can't reparent them. Not even to say that it's the parent's fault, but like, yeah, we can't fix that. Like so there's something really wrong with that person, and that's on them that's their path in this life to hopefully get that stuff straightened out. But it's not worth us getting tangled up with them, thinking that given enough, love or hope or therapy or rehab or religion, that they can change. So let's see here. The next point you have is, okay, and I like what you said here. Okay, so the question was, what are they really doing when they act in an unprovoked, covert, aggressive manner?
And my point was, they've misrepresented themselves to me. They've deliberately and intentionally tried to deceive me. And when that comes out, I really have to face the fact that I really don't know who they really are. When you figure out somebody's running all these games on you and all these tactics, it's really a wake-up call. It changes your life, because that wasn't your reality. You weren't running game. You were sincere, you were honest, you were truthful, you went in with an open heart, and you had the best of intentions. Yeah, okay, maybe you made some mistakes, but in general, you were wanting to make it work. You weren't plotting and scheming and coming up with all these manipulations in your mind and trying to figure out how to run your next game on somebody. So
Yeah, I agree. That was,
they are able to pull it off though for a really long time. In fact, when you said they can't act like adults, but it's so funny because that's the first thing they'll accuse you of doing, and your head gets turned around backwards trying to figure out, wait, who is acting like the adult? They're not. They're calling what they're doing adult behavior, and they're holding it up to me as an example, but there's something wrong. So yeah, I'm sorry, go ahead.
well, no, you're fine. I think especially too, if they are acting like Prince Charming, which, was my situation, or I should say a couple of my situations, and came across as the ideal adult, really. I mean, incredibly charming, very seemingly solutions oriented, pleasant, polite, totally wonderful, but then had this double life. And for me with Jack, I'm just so outrageously thankful that I found out as much as I did kind of all at one time, because had I found out little pieces here and there, I think it would have been really easy for me to justify it, because everything I was experiencing with them didn't match that double life. And, so I probably would have bought into, oh, it was, he felt insecure because I was younger, or he felt, he thought I was cheating because his ex supposedly cheated on him. And I probably would have bought into a lot of that. The big aha moment for me with that covert behavior was when I began digging and digging and digging, and I came across all of these other dating profiles and all of these dating sites. And it was on one dating site in particular. There were two different things. One was he was using my pet name for him as his screen name. But earlier I had found, so the first few dating profiles I had found, he was looking for casual sex with men, women, couples, you name it. And I was horrified, and I'm like, okay, well, he's out looking to cheat. But then I came across a profile of his on another dating site where he was looking for a long-term relationship. And he was saying everything that any woman would want to hear. And, he's looking for the one, it just hasn't happened yet. Here he is, kind of this handsome, rugged, wonderful guy. And I remember thinking that was so odd, because if you're going to cheat, why wouldn't you just do what his other profiles were doing, where he was just looking for sex with strangers? It didn't compute that he was saying I'm like, how are you looking for a long-term relationship when we live together? What was the plan? And then seeing that he was using my screen name or my pet name for him as his screen name, that was the aha moment of, okay, I don't know who this person is. This guy is an emotional and financial con artist. I've been duped. The person I fell in love with is dead to me. He never existed. And that was an emotional struggle that I went through. I don't know. It wasn't that long. I was pretty tough on myself. And I had a friend of mine who was kind of this no nonsense gal from Ireland. And, she just kept telling me, she's like, you don't even look back. Like, this guy, he's not who you thought he was. And yeah, you still have feelings for him, but so what? Like, it doesn't, he's a con artist. Like, you just have your feelings, nurse those feelings, but drive forward. Like, don't let those feelings pull you back in with a con artist. And
Yeah.
Let's see. And I think it's so important for people to realize, you know, who and what they're doing when you're not looking is who they really are. And the bad side of them, if you're in a relationship where there's that Dr. Jekyll, Mr. Hyde, where they're, verbally abusive and, emotionally or psychologically or physically or what have you abusive, that there is no justifying that. And that's who they are too. And that's problematic and worthy of being a deal breaker. Which brings me to my next point is your question is, why do we put up with it for so long?
And I say because it has value to us, because we're in it for, I guess, lack of a better word, the right reasons. But for whatever reason, it just does not have the same value to them. They're literally gambling on you excusing them over and over again. And as long as I can kid myself and believe that they're acting this way because they're scared or insecure or depressed, or maybe even just overly stressed, or even that I might have done something that I'm not aware of that caused them to feel this way, then I'll excuse it and I'll continue to condone the behavior, because we like relationships. We want them to work out. We enjoy that, the trust and the honesty and the safety that comes with that. So we make a lot of excuses. I mean, I finally had to, we talk a lot about how much they lie. I had to admit that I was a liar. And that was tough. I had to admit I'd been lying to myself for years and just making excuses, rationalizing, justifying, excusing, pushing things away that didn't make sense, saying I'll figure that out later, just so I could keep the relationship, because I valued it highly.
Yeah.
So,
and Elise says on the chat, she says, I had a false belief system that relationships have issues and that he'll be different when we live together. And Lou says, and I just didn't know any different. And a lot of people, and Scott says, it's because we had no idea some people could be so evil. We wanted the relationship to work, again, because we were in love with the mask. And yeah, I think there's so many different reasons as to why people stay. It's just, there's no shortage of well-intended bad advice out there. Or people are like, well, my religion says that, divorce is not an option, or, I didn't have the funds to leave, or I just really thought that they would eventually see if I could just get through to them and let them know how hurtful their behavior was, that they would eventually change. It's just so hard for people to wrap their mind around that other people are okay with being hurtful and that they will never ever change. It's hard.
yeah, I'm looking through my notes. It's really an important point to me is that acting aggressively and deliberately against another human being for no reason and without provocation, it's just not something I can comprehend. I mean, if you hit me, yeah, I want to hit you back.
Mm-hmm.
I do. But I can't walk up to you and start the fight. It's just not in me. I don't know how to.
He gives the example too in the book of, most of us think that anger, how did he put it? That anger precedes aggression.
Yes.
So like with road rage, or I was talking about last night, you know, I get really hangry if I haven't eaten and I want to act a certain way. There's that frustration or that anger that would precede. I mean, I'm able to control myself and, you know, not go bananas in the grocery store, but like how a person that's going, you know, getting road rage, they might get angry or frustrated, then lash out and start honking and cut somebody off. There's kind of this cause and effect to their behavior. Not to say that it's okay, but there's a cause and effect to it versus an emotional manipulator where they will oftentimes use anger and aggression as a manipulation. And he gives the example of all of a sudden starting to yell at somebody over something maybe not that's not even really going on. Like you happen to there, you know, you guys are watching the news and a commercial comes on and you change the channel and they start yelling and it's designed to knock a person off balance. There's no rhyme or reason for it. There is no cause and effect. It's intended to manipulate or just random threats at a person.
I like the back to that driving episode. He talked about that. I reread that today, where he says they're acting aggressively already. They're speeding, or they're already acting aggressively, and they don't get angry until somebody tries to impede that. Like say somebody pulls in front of them going 10 miles slower than they are. Now the anger comes, but they're already acting aggressively for absolutely no reason that anybody can comprehend.
And I think a lot of it's that attitude of entitlement.
Yeah.
I mean, there's a couple of narcissists in my family, and it's terrifying to get in the car with them because they would and I've said to these people multiple times, would you rather be right or would you rather be dead? Because the way that you're driving, you're going to kill us all. And they don't, and to them, they would rather be right. And it's just that attitude of, you know, how dare anybody get in my way? And they just don't care. Yeah, it's wild. Let's see here. Okay, so he goes over the different covert aggressive behaviors. So let me run through these, and Lucy, feel free to chime in if you want to add anything to these.
Okay.
Okay, so the first one is minimization, or as he calls it, making a molehill out of a mountain, which is taking a very serious infraction and minimizing its importance or the harm it's caused. And he says character disturbed people frequently trivialize the nature of their wrongdoings. The benefit of this tactic is it can make those who are confronting them feel overly harsh in their criticism or unjust in the appraisal of the situation. Minimization is not primarily the way that they make themselves feel better about what they did, but it's primarily the way that they try to manipulate our impression of them. I think that's important. Remember, they are most often comfortable with who they are. So the primary objective is to get us to believe there is nothing wrong with the kind of person they are. The next one is lying. He says, someone knew how manipulators operate when they came up with tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth. Because manipulators are always looking to blur the line. They lie frequently, sometimes just for sport, and they may lie when the truth would work better. They lie by omission, telling a bunch of facts, but leaving out others that would totally change the picture. And they lie by distortion, which means like being vague. They use denial, which I think we're all very familiar with. So that would be like, well, that never happened, or you're crazy, or, you know, who are you going to believe? Like me or your lying eyes, kind of a thing. Rationalization. It's an effective explanation or justification that can make enough sense that any reasonably conscientious person is likely to fall for it. Then you have diversion. And it's a moving target that's hard to hit. It distracts from the main issue at hand and nothing gets resolved. Whenever someone isn't responding directly to an issue, you can safely assume that for some reason they are trying to give you the slip. I think that's very important to realize too, that normal people don't need to create this like elaborate explanation for something. Generally, a few words like yes or no suffice. So if a person's going to great lengths to not address the situation, not address your question, they're trying to get out of telling the full truth. Evasion. It's closely related to diversion, but it's more word salad. It's a rambling, irrelevant response to a direct question. Then you have covert intimidation, where aggressors frequently threaten their victims to keep them anxious, apprehensive, and in a one-down position. He also mentioned in the book that the aggressor sets the terms of engagement in a situation. So there becomes there's now like rules for engagement. There's now rules for conflict. Whoever is the first aggressive, so if a person becomes aggressive against you, then it's important to take action, but to, I think, realize that you're now in a conflict situation. And I'll get to that here a little bit. Okay. Another one is guilt tripping. Character deficient people know that others have very different consciousnesses than they do. The greater level of their target's conscience, the more they can be manipulated, aka self-doubting, anxious, and submissive. All they have to do is suggest that their target doesn't care enough, is too selfish, and then the person feels bad. But the reverse is true. You can't try to get a character deficient person to feel bad about their behavior because they won't. And there's shaming, which is subtle sarcasm and put downs as a mean of increasing fear and self-doubt in others. It's a way they foster inadequacy, which allows them a position of dominance. He gives the example of saying, well, any good parent would do this. It's the implication that in this example, if the wife didn't do this, then she would be a bad parent. Playing the victim role. They know that if they convince people that they are suffering, that we'll try to relieve their distress. Whether or not they believe their own distortions is largely irrelevant. They manipulate us because we believe that they believe it and allow the supposed belief to serve as an excuse for their bad behavior. Vilifying the victim. This makes the victim feel like the bully and puts them on the defensive while masking the aggressive and manipulative intent of the person using the tactic. Playing the servant role, cloaking their self-serving agendas in the guise of service to a more noble cause, they conceal their own ambition and quest for dominance over others. A hallmark characteristic of a covert aggressive personality is loudly professing subservience while fighting for dominance. And in the book, he gives an example of a minister who's basically sacrificing his family in order to get ahead, kind of climb the church hierarchy, and the importance of him looking good in front of the congregation, but it's at the expense of his family. Seduction. Covert aggressive personalities charm, praise, flatter, or overly support others in order to get them to lower their defenses and surrender their trust and loyalty. Projecting the blame. They find scapegoats and often do in subtle, hard to detect ways. blaming someone else, especially the target of abuse, for their abusive behavior is in and of itself an abusive act. And the reason being is it's psychologically abusive. It's spinning things around. Feigning innocence. When they try to convince you that any harm they did was unintentional or that they didn't do it, this tactic is designed to get you to question your judgment and possibly your sanity. Sometimes this tactic can be as subtle as a look of surprise or indignation when they are confronted. Acting confused. When they pretend to not know what you're talking about. It's their way of getting you to question your sanity by playing dumb. Brandishing anger. Conventional wisdom is that anger is an involuntary emotional response that precedes aggression. This is the basis for most anger management programs. However, they can give a deliberate display of anger, which can be very calculated and an effective tool of intimidation, coercion, and ultimately manipulation. In understanding aggressive personalities, anger doesn't always precede aggression. Aggressive personalities want what they want and then get angry when they don't get it. So those are a handful of ways that they go about manipulating people and situations.
But I would have to say that going through those very slowly, like buying the book and then reflecting on my past and coming up with, oh, wow, that's what she was doing. Oh my God, that's what he was doing.
Yeah.
Because I'm telling you, every single one of these tactics was a way of life for me and totally accepted. I did not see, like, not answering a question. Like, and I'll just throw out one example. Like, my father announced in front of a room full of people, told my daughter, oh, I'm so glad that you're not following the example that your mother set and that you haven't ruined your life like she has.
Wow.
And that was my last straw moment. I'll just say that. I decided either he apologizes or we don't go on. But people confronted him after that. And one time he said, you can't prove I said that. That's denial. That was his response. And another time he said, oh, well, all the women in our family are crazy. And well, they used to tote Tommy guns back in the Prohibition. And so we've just got all these wild women in our family. And I'm just stating, but it's diversion. Now you're laughing because he's talking about a funny story. But all this stuff was going on day in, day out, and I could not see it.
Yep.
I mean, I knew my head was spinning and I was going, what just happened here? I don't think I got a straight answer, but it was normal. I can't even explain that.
Oh, I think
do something outrageous and then you're confused, but everybody else accepts it. So you go, well, it must be normal.
Yeah. Well, I think the vast majority of people here can totally understand what you're saying and can relate to it. It's so eye-opening. And like you were saying earlier, it's so validating because when you start getting the terms and the definitions for this, it's like, oh, it's not me. Like, it's not just me being overly sensitive. Like, this is in fact a problem. Like, this is problematic, abusive behavior, and it's manipulative. And this is how this stuff goes down.
That
and
list,
not okay.
That list was more helpful to me than so many other things in unraveling what has been going on my entire life. I could decode so many things with just that list. It was jaw-droppingly amazing to go through that. And it was like I was being introduced to different people that I knew in my family and as even friends. Wow, this is normal behavior for them.
Yeah.
So very helpful for me.
Yes, I agree. Have you read the book, The Verbally Abusive Relationship?
I have, and there's another one she has too, the verbally. Well, I can't remember the name of it. Verbal abuse. She has
Like
several books.
recovering from verbal abuse or something, maybe?
Maybe. And then I've read a lot of her books. I like her, but I don't like her solutions. Like to say, well, now you're just being silly, because I've tried them and they don't work on these people.
Yeah, I'm not real wild about the solution. Like I said, I was actually horrified when I read that, when she said, you know, to record somebody. I thought, man, this is, if somebody's relationship is this bad that they're looking for a book, like this could really put them in harm's way. And that scared me. But what I liked most about that book is she lists out not all of them, but a lot of verbally abusive behaviors, and that very much similar to what he did, but totally different set of verbal abusive behaviors. And it was so eye-opening going through those, because it's like, oh, that's what that was, and yes, that's what that was, and now that makes sense. And just absolutely fantastic. So I have some more notes here. Am I getting these out of order? No. Yes. No. Maybe. Hold on. Okay, so I have here, he says, disturbed characters, especially the various aggressive ones, are very goal-oriented, agenda-driven individuals whose use of tactics is conscious, calculated, and deliberate. It's important that you don't buy into the notion that they aren't fully aware. What's important to realize is that when somebody uses these tactics frequently, you know what kind of character you are dealing with, and you know the tools of manipulation are signs of resistance to change, and that they will be doing this again. Nothing will change until they decide to stop fighting and start accepting. And we had talked about this before in previous live streams with, you know, the first part of change for a person is that there's awareness that there's a problem. And with then kind of the next step of that is full accountability for their behavior of, yes, I stole the car. It was wrong. I shouldn't have done that. I'm sorry. It will never happen again. Period. Not, well, I really needed to go to the store and you weren't home, or it's not kind of giving excuses. It's not tap dancing around it. It's not minimizing it. It's, I did this. It was wrong. I'm sorry. It won't happen again. And maybe I'll do whatever I need to do in order to rebuild trust. And then they actually take that action to make sure that it never happens again. So if a person's continuing to throw out all of these, the denial, the justification, the minimization, the trying to get you to share the blame, oh, it's a relationship issue, I think we should go to couples counseling, or, you know, this is because of my childhood, or I act this way because I had a long day, or what have you, they're still not being fully accountable for their behavior. And it's, a person's not going to change until they're fully accountable for what they're doing. So I really liked that he got that part. Oh, and this is what I was talking about earlier. He said the basic rule of human engagement is that the aggressor sets the rules. Anyone who has launched the first strike has defined the terms of engagement. Any victim of aggression is always scrambling to establish a balance of power. It is impossible to deal effectively with anyone when you start out in a one down position. If you want to avoid being victimized or aggressed against, you must move quickly to redefine the terms of engagement. To guard against victimization, you must, and he lists 5 things. Number 1, be free of potentially harmful misconceptions about human nature and behavior. Number 2, know how to correctly assess the character of others. We talked a little bit about that. Is this an event or is this a pattern? If it's a pattern, it's personality, it's character. Number 3, have high self-awareness, especially about your own character and vulnerabilities. Number 4, recognize and correctly label the tactics of manipulation and respond to them appropriately. And number 5, avoid fighting losing battles. So let me kind of back up to number 3 there. He talks about having high self-awareness, especially about your own character and vulnerabilities. If you know, you're like, man, I get sucked in every single time when they start crying, or when they promise to change, or when they come over wanting to have sex, or whatever seems to always work for you, that reopens the door to realize, okay, this is how they keep getting in. This is the vulnerability of mine that they're continuing to exploit, and to prepare yourself for that so it doesn't continue to happen. He says, doing these 5 things will help you to maintain a position of strength and power. And then he lists out some harmful misconceptions that people have. And we talked about this earlier, but everyone is basically the same. Character disordered people do not act or think the same way as other people do. They do not share the same worldview or code of conduct, and they are not influenced or motivated by the same things. Aggressive personalities seek to win. They don't take no for an answer. They must get their way. Covert aggressive personalities rarely give a straight answer. They make excuses for doing hurtful things. They try to make you feel guilty or other subtle tactics to get their way. Any manipulator's real leverage is in knowing the character of his victim well enough to know how that person will respond to their tactics. They may know that the victim will buy into them, giving them the benefit of the doubt, be hesitant to ascribe evil intention, and believe their excuses. Manipulators are great at assessing weakness. And let's see. Then he lists 5 kind of areas that are worth our time to examine within ourselves. He says, know yourself, being naive, having a hard time accepting that a person could be this ruthless or conniving. You know, like we talked about before, it's for so many of us, it takes decades to realize, oh, like we didn't even know people like this walked the earth. And if they did walk the earth, that we would know them. They would look like a bad, evil person. We didn't realize that they came sometimes dressed as family, friends, neighbors, a person at church, somebody that we volunteer with. We just didn't have that on our radar. Number 2, over-conscientiousness. We tend to be harder on ourselves than others. We're too willing to give them the benefit of the doubt and too ready to see their side of things and too willing to blame ourselves when they go on the attack. Number 3, low self-confidence. We're overly doubting, chronically unsure of our right to pursue our legitimate wants and needs. That's huge. We may lack confidence about our ability to face conflict directly and resolve them effectively. We may be likely to go on the defensive too early when challenged by an aggressive personality. Over-intellectualization. Do you try too hard to understand or assume that people only do hurtful things when there's some sort of legitimate, understandable reason? You might delude yourself into thinking that if you can just get to the bottom of it, then change could happen. Or spending so much time in trying to understand when you should be more focused in trying to protect and empower yourself. Some people fight, and they fight dirty to get what they want for no other purpose because they want something. Number 5, emotional dependency. Do you have a submissive personality where you let people run all over you out of fear of them leaving? The more dependent you are on someone, the more vulnerable you are to being exploited and manipulated by them. Realize that they are always fighting for what they want. Respond on the basis of what you legitimately want or need. Don't react instinctively and defensively to what they're doing. Keep your power and control. And this is the shift of, and it takes practice. It takes practice of shifting from being reactive to being responsive.
I was definitely guilty of the over intellectualization and overly conscientious. So
yeah,
I fit that description.
Yeah, I think, I do too. And again, I think it just goes back to, you think about how else are we supposed to learn this? Do you know what I mean? Like, where in school or in movies or in conversations did any of us learn this? I think if anything, we all learned the opposite. If we're a good person and do good things will come back to us. Treat others like we would want to be treated. Forgive and forget, kind of always be willing to kind of make amends.
Give the benefit of the doubt.
There you go.
I like people to give me the benefit of the doubt, especially these characters, So I don't know, just the caring too much. I guess that might be what he's calling overly dependent. I call it caring too much. But yeah.
Yeah, I think it's kind of us projecting our moral compass and our conscious onto them, and thinking, well, they just have to be like us, and that they have to be on the level. And this kind of reminds me of, there was a story maybe about a year or so ago that there were these 2 prisoners that were in jail, and I forget for what, murder maybe, or robbery. And they conned the female prison guard one of them conned her into thinking that he loved her and that he wanted to marry her. And she left her husband and her child for him and helped him escape. And then, of course, none of it was real. He was just using her to get out of prison, and ran off with this other guy. And so here she is. You would think, you're a prison guard. There is training as far as, this is antisocial personality disorder. These people are emotional and physical and financial and sexual con artists. It's really important that you don't believe a word that comes out of their mouth. And yet she still fell into it because they're so manipulative. And, they're just, we see kind of what we want to see, I think, a lot of the time too. And we think, well, if I really care about this person and then they're acting like they really care, then they must care. And so it's confusing when they're giving all the signals that they do care, or that they're saying all the right things, or that they're acting in that kind of love bombing kind of way. It's understandable that people would get duped by this. And it's not until you go through it, sometimes a couple times, to really realize, oh, okay, these people do exist, and this kind of behavior is on a spectrum. And it basically, if something feels off, it's because it's off. Because it's going to come across as different with every single emotional manipulator. It's not, even though there's a lot of similarities between all of our experiences, they're still very different. And so that's why it's important to kind of, I think, pay attention to your gut. at the end of the day.
I agree.
Let's see. Okay, he says, accept no excuses. If someone's behavior is wrong, then the rationale they offer is totally irrelevant. Remember, the excuse is trying to maintain a position from which they should be backing away from. The moment they start explaining, they are resisting submission, and you can be certain that they are trying to get you to cave and will engage in this behavior again. Don't focus on the explanation, focus on the behavior. Judge actions, not intentions. Who knows why people do what they do? What's important to look at is what they're actually doing. Failing to see the aggression and tactics is how people continue to be manipulated. We have to set personal limits. This involves setting two kinds of limits on behavior. First, you must decide what kinds of behavior you'll tolerate from another before taking some sort of counteraction or deciding to disengage. And second, you must decide what action you're both willing and able to take in order to take better care of yourself. Telling someone you aren't going to put up with this anymore doesn't set a limit. Be specific. And I really like that. So it's important that we have deal breaker behavior. And it's also important to know how we're going to handle it. So getting upset with somebody is really vague. And this is kind of what we were talking about earlier, where it can be exhausting if you're continually trying to catch a person and what they're doing and saying, I don't do silent treatment. So like being specific, I'm not going to put up with silent treatment. I'm either going to pack a bag and leave and go stay at a friend's house, or I'm going to turn the radio on, or you can just make dinner for yourself. And I'm not doing this. Like you can just say, like, this is what I'm going to do. I'm not going to engage in this. If it happens again, I'm going to do X, Y, Z. But just saying, I'm not okay with silent treatment, but then there's no consequence, isn't setting a limit. Boundaries always have consequences to them. Let's see. There was a strategy in here when he was talking about, if you have to keep communication with these kinds of people in your life, he says, when dealing with any aggressive personality, propose as many win-win scenarios as you can, because it puts to use their determination to win. And so ideally proposing a scenario where you win and they win. They really don't like it if they lose. And then they will generally continue their fight instinct is going to be even stronger. So he gives the example of, it was the pastor and his wife, where she says, I know you really want to get that promotion at work, but I also need your time and support. I'll support you in getting your promotion if you can take weekends off and eat dinner at home 2 nights a week. So that would be kind of a win-win. But he says, be prepared for consequences. If they feel defeated, they will likely try anything to regain the upper hand and a sense of vindication. Anticipate their actions and plan accordingly. I think that's really important, because a lot of times they'll spin things and be like, you're giving me an ultimatum. You're being manipulative. You're being abusive. When you're trying to set a boundary and say, I'm not going to tolerate you doing this. It's not okay that you're checking out the waitress when we're out to dinner, or I'm not going to tolerate you giving me the silent treatment. I'm going to leave. You're being mean to me. You're being threatening.
Controlling is the word
Yes.
I always heard. I was always, when I started trying to set boundaries, I say, it's not okay to criticize me. It's not okay to tell me should. It's not okay to tell me how I should live my life. You don't have to suffer the consequences. Well, you're being controlling. You're trying to control me.
Yes.
No, that's not what's going on.
Yes. And then, of course, because like you were saying, it's their mindset. So they continually spin things. So if you point out to them, no, there's a difference between being controlling and setting boundaries. And I'm telling you that it's not okay for you to treat me this way, because their mindset is so skewed that then they'll say, if they're doing silent treatment, or if they're getting upset, then they're going to be like, well, no, this is me setting a boundary. And they'll use that, sometimes that same language back on you, or like, well, how does that feel now that I'm doing it to you? And if a person doesn't have a solid grasp on what's healthy, it's really easy to get knocked off balance and to think, well, maybe, like, am I being unreasonable for saying that I don't want to be yelled at? Or it's really easy to get dragged off the trail. And that's why I think books like this, learning as much as you can about manipulative behavior or abusive behavior, can really, really help, because then once you know what it is, it's much easier to stand firm and say, no, I'm not okay with being yelled at. Or like you were saying, don't tell me what I should and shouldn't do, because the word should implies judgment. So if you're telling me that I should cut my hair or I should grow out my hair, you're basically saying that what I'm doing is wrong. That's the default to that statement. But people that aren't used to communicating in a healthy way, they're just used to all this. So then, especially if you get family, right? Like if this gets going this is my ongoing scenario. And frankly, one of the reasons I live in a totally different state from all of my family. But when there would be get-togethers, it's just this. It was for years. I'm like, why do I leave here and I feel like I can't breathe, or that I need another vacation, or I just am angry. And I for years I thought it was just me, because nobody else seemed to have an issue. And if I did try to assert myself, it was, Dana, why are you being so difficult? Or, why do you have to bring that up? Or like, and finally it was, I don't even understand you people. Like, I've got to get out of here.
I hear you. You're speaking my language, and you need another vacation.
Yeah.
But the interesting thing is, they enjoy it. They get a kick out of it. And I swear they don't feel the same feelings that I feel. Yes. I think they could sit there and trade insults and slug it out verbally, not physically, but slug it out all day long. And it's fun. And it's exhausting to me to try to deal with that.
Yeah.
I think they enjoy it.
Yeah. And it's interesting because I have family in Chicago and I have family in Houston, and they're very dysfunctionally different. And so I have one set of that family that their way of getting along is they just don't talk about anything. There's all kinds of secrets and lies, but it's weird. It's sort of like walking into a dance, and everybody knows the routine except for me. And so I get in there, and it's just this unspoken rule of, yes, these are all of the things that we just don't talk about. And so if I were to bring up anything, even stuff that I would think, why? Here's an example. This was years ago. My father got a car, a different car, like a newer car. And for some reason, this was a big secret. I have no idea why. It doesn't matter. I don't care. But it was this whole thing of like, I wasn't supposed to know this. And then of course it came out, because how are you going to hide a car? Like it was just, the whole thing was so strange. And so I was trying to figure out, well, why didn't anybody say, like, I'm glad that you got a new car. Good for you. I don't understand why, I just don't understand, like, why would this even matter? And why was this a secret? And, but that's how they are. It's like, they're secretive about things that they don't need to be secretive about. And so you never knew what you could talk about and what you couldn't talk about. And then the other family was like what you're describing. It was lots of kind of cruel and biting sarcasm and put downs and jabs and being really loud and being aggressive. And again, when I was over there, I'm like, I'm not sure again where the lines are, because to me, everything about this is really inappropriate. And so if I were to hop in and give a jab, you know, people would look at me like I'm a jerk. So I'm like, okay, I don't know the dance over here either. So it was just, I got to the point where I'm like, this is just not enjoyable. And I gotta go. I gotta go.
I hear you. I hear you.
So one last thing that he says, here's a quote. It's from M.S. Peck, and it says, "Love is not a feeling, an art, or a state of mind. It's a behavior." And I love that. I love that. Love is a behavior. So it's so important that we realize to get crystal clear with that. It's not a feeling, it's not an art or a state of mind, it's a behavior.
Yeah, that was part of my awakening, was one of the first things that just floated up as a truth was, if someone doesn't act like they love you, then they don't love you.
Yeah.
And that was huge, huge awakening coming out of the fog moment.
Yeah, it really is. You know, love doesn't use, it doesn't abuse, it doesn't exploit, it doesn't neglect, it doesn't yell, it doesn't belittle or put down or grind down or
Mock
hinder.
or make fun of or insult.
Yep.
Or be cruel, hurtful, insult.
Yep. Yep. Love doesn't hurt in any way, shape, or form. It's that lack of love that causes that pain. And, you know, again, so many movies and media and garbage on TV that we see portrays love as pain. You know, that love conquers all, but that love is pain. That love is somehow being dragged through hell and making it out on the other side with this person. And that's not love, that's dysfunction. And until we see that difference, I mean, it really is, it's a big waking up moment where you realize so much of what we've all been sold has been a big fat lie. And that, you know, what's normal is generally very dysfunctional, and to not go for what's normal, but to go for what's healthy. And, you know, you know, like, you know, what's healthy based on how you feel. So move towards what brings you peace in your life. That's always a good direction to head. So next book club, Lucy, I forgot to write it down. Doggone.
Respect Me Rules by Michael and Shelley Marshall. It's a brother and sister team. That's the July book.
Okay, and we're doing that one. Yeah, you're right. It's the Respect Me Rules. And that one is it the last Thursday in July?
Yes.
Okay.
Okay, don't ask me the date.
Okay,
last
I won't.
Thursday in July, 6:30 Eastern Standard Time.
Yes, ma'am. You got it. And so for those that were interested in the book club, Lucy and I are going to be figuring this out now. So I will be in touch in the next day or so with some sort of plan. So if you're interested in joining the book club, we'd love to have you. You can email me at deardana@thriveafterabuse.com and put in the subject line book club. So I know that you're interested. And so what we ask for the book club, it's free, and that you would have read the book, you know, at least a week or so before the book club meeting day, so we can all discuss the book together, and then we'll go from there. So I think that's it. And then Lucy, hang tight, and I'll hop on Zoom and we'll figure this out, okay?
Okay, good night.
Okay, yes. Thank you, Lucy, so much for your time and your wisdom and your notes and all of your hard work on book club. You are just an amazing lady and resource, and we're so glad to have you as part of the team.
I love to read. It is a passion. I'm just glad it can be used usefully.
Yes, well, we are too. So, okay, good night, everybody. And we will, I'll see you next Wednesday.